A frigid wind howled across the barren landscape as Catherine Miller clutched her shawl tighter around her slender shoulders, her knuckles white against the reins of her wagon. The year was 1878, and the promise of a new life in Silver City, New Mexico, seemed to grow more distant with each passing mile of the desolate trail. The journey west had not been kind to Catherine. At 23, she had already weathered more hardship than most women twice her age. The death of her parents 6 months prior had left her with nothing but a handful of cherished possessions, a wagon that had seen better days, and a determination to forge her own path in life. Catherine glanced at the darkening sky, anxiety creeping into her chest as the sun dipped below the jagged horizon. She had hoped to reach the next way station before nightfall, but the broken wagon wheel earlier that day had cost her precious hours. Now, she faced the prospect of camping alone in unfamiliar territory. "Just a little farther, Belle," she murmured to her tired mare, patting the horse's neck reassuringly. The animal snorted in response, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. As Catherine guided the wagon toward a small clearing sheltered by a cluster of pinyon pines, the first snowflakes began to fall. Winter had arrived early in the territory, and she knew she needed to make camp quickly. With practiced movements, Catherine set about preparing for the night. She unhitched Belle, tethering her close to the wagon where she could feed the mare some of their dwindling grain supply. She gathered what firewood she could find, grateful for the small axe her father had insisted she bring. The fire provided modest warmth as Catherine huddled close, her gloved hands outstretched toward the flames. She had traveled for nearly 2 months since leaving her small hometown in Missouri, each day bringing her closer to the opportunity that awaited in Silver City, a position as a school teacher that her late father's friend had arranged. "Just 3 more days," she whispered to herself, a small comfort in the vast silence surrounding her. The howl came without warning, a long, mournful sound that cut through the night like a knife. Catherine froze, her blood running cold as another howl answered the first, then another. Wolves. Belle nickered nervously, pawing at the ground. Catherine rose slowly to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had heard stories of wolf packs growing bold during harsh winters, attacking livestock and even the occasional traveler. The shadows beyond the firelight seemed to shift and move. Catherine reached for her father's revolver, tucked safely in her belt. She had practiced with it countless times, but the thought of actually firing at a living creature made her stomach turn. A pair of amber eyes glinted in the darkness, then another. Catherine counted at least 5 sets of eyes surrounding her camp. The wolves emerged from the shadows, their gaunt frames evidence of their hunger. The lead wolf, a massive gray beast with battle-scarred ears, bared its teeth in a silent snarl. "Stay back," Catherine warned, her voice steadier than she felt as she raised the revolver. The wolves continued their approach, unperturbed by her presence. She fired a warning shot into the air, hoping to scare them off, but the sound only momentarily startled them before they resumed their advance. Belle screamed in terror as one of the wolves lunged toward her, snapping at her legs. Catherine fired again, this time aiming at the ground near the predator. The wolf leaped back, but the others began to circle closer. Panic surged through her as she realized her predicament. 6 bullets in her revolver, at least 5 wolves, and no guarantee that a hit would stop one of the desperate animals. Belle reared and pulled at her tether, the wagon rocking precariously with the mare's frantic movements. The lead wolf crouched, preparing to spring. Catherine aimed directly at it, her finger tightening on the trigger, when a shot rang out from somewhere behind her. The wolf yelped and darted away as 3 more shots followed in quick succession, scattering the pack into the darkness. "Get in your wagon, madam," a deep voice commanded. Catherine whirled around to see a man on horseback emerging from the trees, a rifle in his hands. Without questioning, she scrambled into the wagon, pulling her blankets around her as a shield. The stranger dismounted with fluid grace, his tall frame silhouetted against the firelight. He moved with purpose, checking the perimeter of the camp before approaching Belle to calm the terrified animal. "They'll be back," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Wolf pack that size, this hungry they won't give up easily." Catherine peered out from the wagon, studying the man who had appeared like some guardian angel from the wilderness. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in well-worn buckskins and a dark wool coat. A cowboy hat sat low on his brow, shadowing his features in the dim light. "Thank you," Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." The man turned toward her, and in the flickering firelight, Catherine caught a glimpse of his face. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' growth of beard. His eyes, though she couldn't discern their color in the darkness, were alert and watchful. "Benjamin Walker," he introduced himself with a slight nod. "Most folks call me Ben." "Catherine Miller," she replied, climbing down from the wagon despite her lingering fear. "I'm grateful for your assistance, Mr. Walker." Ben moved to tend the fire, adding more wood until the flames leaped higher, pushing back the darkness. "You're a long way from anywhere, Miss Miller." "Traveling alone isn't safe in these parts, especially with winter setting in." Catherine straightened her spine, lifting her chin slightly. "I'm aware of the risks, Mr. Walker. I'm heading to Silver City to take a position as a schoolteacher." Ben glanced at her with newfound interest. "Silver City, that's where I'm headed myself." He studied her wagon and the nervous mare. "Though I reckon I'm better equipped for the journey." As if to emphasize his point, a distant howl echoed across the landscape. Belle whinnied nervously, and Catherine couldn't suppress a shiver. Ben checked his rifle before setting it within easy reach. "You're not alone out here," he said, his voice softening slightly. "Not anymore. I'll see you safely to Silver City." Catherine wasn't accustomed to accepting help from strangers, but she wasn't foolish enough to refuse it under the circumstances. "I wouldn't want to delay your journey." A hint of a smile tugged at the corner of Ben's mouth. "I'm not in any particular hurry, Miss Miller." "And it seems you could use an extra gun." As if on cue, the wolves howled again, closer this time. Catherine nodded her agreement, relief washing over her despite her natural wariness. "They're circling back," Ben observed, rising to his feet. "Best get some rest while you can." "I'll take first watch." Catherine hesitated, still uncertain about placing her trust in this mysterious cowboy who had appeared from nowhere. "Mr. Walker, might I ask what brings you to Silver City?" Ben's expression grew guarded. "Looking for work, same as many. Mining towns always hiring." He turned away, effectively ending the conversation. "Get some sleep, Miss Miller. Dawn comes early and we've got a long road ahead." Catherine retreated to her wagon, wrapping herself in blankets against the growing cold. Through the canvas covering, she could see Ben's silhouette as he moved around the camp, securing their perimeter. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as the wolves continued their eerie chorus in the distance. The night passed slowly, with Catherine drifting in and out of restless sleep. Each time she woke, she found Ben vigilant, his attention focused on the darkness beyond their camp. Only once did he rouse her when the wolves ventured too close, and together they drove them back with noise and firelight. As dawn painted the eastern sky in pale hues of pink and gold, Catherine emerged from her wagon to find Ben preparing coffee over a fresh fire. "You look like you could use this," he said, offering her a tin cup of the steaming brew. Catherine accepted gratefully, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm metal. "Did you sleep at all, Mr. Walker?" Ben shrugged, sipping from his own cup. "I've gone longer without rest. The wolves cleared out about an hour ago, likely found easier prey." In the morning light, Catherine could see him clearly for the first time. His eyes were a striking blue, weathered at the corners from years squinting against the sun. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into his beard. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but there was something compelling about his rugged features. "We should head out soon," Ben said, interrupting her assessment. "Storm's brewing to the north. Better make some distance before it hits." Catherine nodded, moving to pack up her meager camp. As she worked, she couldn't help but notice Ben examining her wagon with a critical eye. "This wheel's not going to hold," he commented, crouching to inspect the repair she had attempted the previous day. "The rim's cracked. Might get you another 10 miles if we're lucky." Catherine's heart sank. "I don't have the means to replace it." Ben stood, brushing dust from his hands. "There's a trading post about 8 miles south of here. Man named Jennings runs it. He might have what we need, or at least be able to make proper repairs." "South," Catherine frowned. "But Silver City is northwest of here." "It is," Ben agreed, "but we won't get there with a broken wagon. Sometimes you have to go backward to move forward, Miss Miller." Catherine considered their options, which were admittedly few. "Very well, Mr. Walker. I'll defer to your judgment." They set out as the sun climbed higher, Ben riding alongside Catherine's wagon. The going was slow, with Ben frequently dismounting to check the damaged wheel. The wolves had disappeared with the morning light, but Catherine remained vigilant, her father's revolver close at hand. "May I ask how long you've been traveling, Miss Miller?" Ben inquired after they had ridden in silence for nearly an hour. "Almost 2 months," Catherine replied. "I left Missouri in late September." Ben nodded thoughtfully. "Long journey for a woman alone. Must be a good position waiting in Silver City." "The school board has offered me room and board along with a modest salary," Catherine explained. "It's not much, but it's a chance to begin anew." She hesitated before adding, "My parents passed earlier this year. There was nothing keeping me in Missouri." "I'm sorry for your loss," Ben said, his voice genuine. "Losing family ain't easy." Something in his tone suggested personal experience with grief. Catherine studied his profile, noting the subtle tension in his jaw. "Do you have family, Mr. Walker?" Ben was quiet for so long that Catherine thought he might not answer. "Had a brother," he finally said. "Lost him in '76 during a skirmish with some Apache raiders." He cleared his throat. "Parents passed when I was young." "I'm sorry," Catherine said softly. Ben merely nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. They lapsed into silence again, each lost in private thoughts as the landscape rolled by. The trading post appeared shortly after midday, a weathered wooden structure nestled in a small valley between rocky hills. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and several horses were hitched outside, indicating other travelers. "Let me do the talking," Ben advised as they approached. "Jennings can be particular about who he does business with." The interior of the trading post was dimly lit and cluttered with goods ranging from practical necessities to curious oddities. A grizzled man with one clouded eye stood behind a rough-hewn counter, watching their entrance with suspicion. "Walker," he grunted in recognition. "Been a spell." Ben nodded. "Jennings, need a wagon wheel or at least someone who can fix one." Jennings' gaze shifted to Catherine, his expression unreadable. "Who's the lady, Miss Miller?" Ben replied. "Heading to Silver City for teaching work." The old trader snorted. Long way to go for book learning. Silver City's a rough place these days. Catherine stepped forward. I'm aware of the challenges, sir, but I'm committed to my position. Jennings seemed to reassess her, his good eye narrowing. Got spirit, at least. Won't help much against claim jumpers and desperados, though. Ben interrupted before Catherine could respond. The wheel, Jennings, can you help or not? The trader stroked his grizzled beard. Might have something that'll work, cost you though. I have money, Catherine began, but Ben raised a hand to stop her. How much? He asked Jennings. The haggling that followed was swift and practiced, ending with an agreement that seemed to satisfy both men. Catherine watched the exchange with fascination, noting the unspoken language of nods and gestures that seemed to convey as much as their words. He'll have someone look at your wagon, Ben explained as they stepped outside. Might take a day or so to make proper repairs. Catherine's disappointment must have shown on her face, for Ben added, Jennings has rooms for travelers, basic but clean enough. As predicted, the repair would require a new wheel entirely, which Jennings' assistant would need to fashion from the materials at hand. Catherine reluctantly agreed to the delay, knowing she had little choice. That evening, as they sat in the trading post's small dining area, sharing a simple meal of venison stew and cornbread, Catherine found herself studying Ben with growing curiosity. You seem familiar with these parts, Mr. Walker, she observed. Ben nodded, breaking a piece of cornbread. Spent most of my life in the territories. Arizona, New Mexico, parts of Texas. Yet you're not a miner or a rancher, Catherine mused. What exactly do you do, if I may ask? Ben's expression grew guarded again. Bit of everything. Scouting, hunting, drove cattle for a while. He took a sip of coffee. These days, I tend to go where work takes me. Catherine sensed there was more to his story, but his reticence was clear. Well, I'm certainly grateful our paths crossed when they did. A hint of a smile crossed Ben's face. Seems like Providence, Miss Miller. The next day passed slowly. Catherine occupied herself with mending her clothes and writing in her journal while Ben disappeared for several hours, returning with a brace of rabbits for their dinner. By evening, the wheel was nearly complete, with Jennings promising they could depart by mid-morning the following day. As they sat by the small fireplace in the trading post's common room that night, Catherine noticed Ben examining a worn map, planning our route. She asked, settling in a chair opposite him. Ben nodded. There's a stretch about 30 miles north of here known for bandit activity, thinking we might take a longer way around, follow the creek westward before turning north again. Is it much farther that way? Adds about a day to the journey, Ben admitted, but safer, especially for a wagon traveling slow. Catherine considered this. I trust your judgment, Mr. Walker. You seem to have kept us out of trouble thus far. Ben folded the map, his expression serious. Miss Miller, there's something you should understand about Silver City before we go much further. Catherine straightened, concerned by his tone. What is it? It's changed since the silver rush began, he explained. Town's grown fast, too fast for law to keep up. There's money to be made, which draws all kinds, good and bad. He leaned forward, his blue eyes intent on hers. Teaching position's respectable work, but you'll need to be careful. Not everyone respects a woman on her own, no matter how proper her profession. Catherine lifted her chin slightly. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Walker, but I'm not as sheltered as I might appear. My father ensured I could handle a firearm and taught me to be vigilant. I don't harbor illusions about frontier life. Ben studied her for a long moment before nodding. Fair enough, Miss Miller. Just wanted you to know what you're riding into. The following morning dawned clear and cold. The new wheel was fitted to Catherine's wagon, and after settling their account with Jennings, they set out on the alternative route Ben had proposed. The landscape changed subtly as they traveled, the sparse grasslands giving way to more rugged terrain dotted with juniper and pinyon. Catherine found herself increasingly aware of Ben's presence beside her, his watchful gaze constantly scanning their surroundings. There was something reassuring about his vigilance, a sense of security she hadn't felt since her father's passing. "Tell me about your teaching," Ben said as they paused to rest the horses near a small stream. "What made you choose that path?" Catherine smiled, warming to the subject. "My mother was a teacher before she married. She taught me to read when I was barely 4 years old, and I've loved learning ever since." She dipped her fingers into the cold stream, watching the water ripple. There's something remarkable about witnessing a child discover knowledge, seeing that moment when understanding dawns in their eyes. Ben listened attentively, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Noble calling. My schooling was limited, learned more from living than from books." "Different kinds of education, but both valuable," Catherine responded. "I hope to teach my students practical knowledge alongside their letters and figures. Life in these territories requires both." As they continued their journey, the conversation flowed more easily between them. Catherine learned that Ben had served briefly in the army following the Civil War, though he had been too young to fight in the conflict itself. He spoke of adventures in Apache territory, cattle drives to Kansas, and winters spent trapping in the mountains. His life seemed so vastly different from her own sheltered existence in Missouri that Catherine found herself captivated by his tales. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood, her dreams of perhaps one day opening her own school, and the books that had transported her to worlds beyond her small town. Ben listened with surprising interest, occasionally asking questions that revealed a sharp intelligence beneath his rough exterior. They made camp that night in a protected hollow, with tall rocks providing shelter from the wind. After a dinner of rabbit stew, they sat by the fire, the night sounds creating a peaceful backdrop to their conversation. "May I ask you something personal, Mr. Walker?" Catherine ventured after a comfortable silence had settled between them. Ben raised an eyebrow but nodded. "You can ask." "Can't promise I'll answer." "Why are you really going to Silver City?" She met his gaze directly. "You've been deliberately vague about your reasons." Ben's expression tightened, and for a moment Catherine thought he might refuse to answer. Instead, he sighed, poking at the fire with a stick. "Looking for someone," he finally admitted. "Man who killed my brother." The admission hung in the air between them. Catherine waited, sensing there was more to the story. "James, my brother, was a deputy marshal," Ben continued, his voice low. "Was escorting a prisoner to Fort Sumner when they were ambushed. Man named William Cordell led the attack. James was shot in the back while trying to protect the prisoner." His jaw clenched. "Cordell's been running ever since, but I got word he was seen in Silver City 3 weeks ago." "You're seeking justice," Catherine said softly. "Some might call it revenge," Ben replied, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "Either way, Cordell's got blood on his hands, and not just my brother's. He needs to answer for it." Catherine considered his words carefully before responding. "I can understand wanting justice for your brother. I only hope you'll seek it through proper channels, Mr. Walker. Taking the law into your own hands rarely ends well for anyone." Ben's expression was unreadable. "Sometimes the law moves too slow, Miss Miller, or not at all." The tension in the air was palpable. Catherine hesitated, then reached across the space between them to touch his hand briefly. "I'm sorry about your brother, truly." Ben's gaze softened slightly at her touch. "It was a long time ago." "Some wounds never fully heal," Catherine observed. "They just become part of us." They sat in silence for a while longer, each lost in thought as the fire burned low. When Catherine finally rose to retire to her wagon, Ben spoke again. "Catherine," he said, using her first name for the first time. "Thank you." She understood he wasn't merely thanking her for her sympathy, but for not judging his intentions. "Good night, Ben," she replied softly, before climbing into her wagon for the night. The next 2 days passed without incident as they traveled steadily northwest. The weather held, though the skies remained threatening with gray clouds that never quite delivered the promised storm. They encountered few other travelers, a merchant heading east with empty wagons, and a small group of miners returning from an unsuccessful venture farther north. On the third day after leaving the trading post, they crested a ridge to find a breathtaking vista spread before them. The vast expanse of territory stretched toward distant mountains, the land painted in shades of rust, gold, and green. In the valley below, a winding river caught the midday sunlight, glinting like a silver ribbon. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Ben remarked, drawing his horse alongside Catherine's wagon. "Magnificent," she agreed. "I never imagined the territory would be so diverse. My books hardly did it justice." Ben smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face. Books rarely capture the feeling of a place, the way the air smells after rain or how the light changes from dawn to dusk. He gestured toward the valley. "We'll follow that river for the next day or so. Good water, plenty of game. Should make for easy traveling." As they descended toward the valley, Catherine noticed Ben becoming increasingly vigilant, his hand often resting near his holstered revolver. When she questioned him, he pointed to a plume of smoke rising in the distance. "Camp," he explained. "Could be friendly, could be trouble. Best to be prepared." They approached cautiously, Ben riding ahead to scout. He returned shortly, his expression relaxed. "Family heading east," he reported. "Man, woman, 3 children, seemed decent enough. Offered to share their camp for the night." Catherine was grateful for the prospect of company after days of isolation. The Marshall family, John, his wife Sarah, and their children aged 8, 6, and 4 welcomed them warmly, eager for news and conversation. While Ben helped John secure the livestock for the night, Catherine assisted Sarah with preparing the evening meal, the women quickly finding common ground in their shared experiences of traveling in the territories. "You're brave to journey alone, Miss Miller," Sarah commented as they worked. "Even with Mr. Walker's protection," Catherine smiled. "It wasn't my intention to travel unaccompanied, but circumstances left me little choice." She glanced toward where Ben was showing the Marshall children how to identify animal tracks in the soft earth. "And Mr. Walker has been a godsend, though our meeting was entirely by chance." Sarah followed her gaze, a knowing look crossing her face. "Providence works in mysterious ways. John and I met under similar circumstances. He rescued me during a flash flood in Texas. Married 6 months later." She smiled at Catherine's surprised expression. "When you know, you know." Catherine felt a blush rising to her cheeks. "Oh, it's not like that between Mr. Walker and myself. He's merely escorting me to Silver City as a kindness." "If you say so, dear," Sarah replied, her tone suggesting she believed otherwise. "But I've seen how he looks at you when you're not watching." Before Catherine could respond, the children came running over, excitedly showing off the tracking skills Ben had taught them. The conversation shifted, but Sarah's words lingered in Catherine's mind throughout the evening. Later, as they sat around the campfire sharing stories, Catherine found herself watching Ben with new awareness. The firelight softened his features, highlighting the kindness in his eyes as he listened patiently to the children's endless questions. He answered them thoughtfully, never dismissing their curiosity or speaking down to them. When the youngest Marshall child, Emily, fell asleep against his side, Ben carefully lifted her into his arms and carried her to her parents' wagon. The tenderness of the gesture stirred something unexpected in Catherine's heart. As the evening wound down and the marshals retired to their wagon, Catherine and Ben found themselves alone by the dying fire. "They seem like good people," Ben observed, adding another log to the flames. Catherine nodded. "They're heading back to Tennessee. Mr. Marshall said the mining didn't pay as they'd hoped and they miss their extended family." "Wise decision," Ben commented. "Territory life isn't for everyone, takes a certain resilience." "Do you think I have it?" Catherine asked suddenly. "That resilience?" Ben studied her for a long moment. "I do," he said finally. "You've got spirit, Catherine Miller. Not everyone would undertake such a journey alone, especially after losing their parents." His use of her full name sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing that in me." Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits despite their different backgrounds. The moment stretched, charged with possibility, before Ben cleared his throat and looked away. "We should reach Silver City in 3 days if the weather holds," he said, his voice slightly gruff. "You'll need to present yourself to the school board upon arrival. They'll be expecting you." Catherine nodded, trying to ignore the pang of disappointment at the reminder that their journey and their time together was drawing to a close. "Yes, Mr. Hollister arranged everything before I left Missouri." Ben rose to his feet, brushing dust from his trousers. "Best get some rest. Long day tomorrow." As Catherine settled into her wagon that night, Sarah Marshall's words echoed in her mind. "When you know, you know." The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She had come west for a fresh start, for independence, not to lose her heart to a man who sought vengeance rather than a future. Yet as she drifted toward sleep, it was Ben's face she saw in her mind's eye, not the hard-edged vigilante tracking his brother's killer, but the gentle man who had carried a sleeping child to bed and who had looked at her across the firelight as though seeing something precious. The Marshalls departed at dawn, heading east as Catherine and Ben continued northwest. The day was clear but cold, with a biting wind that made conversation difficult. They traveled in companionable silence, stopping briefly at midday to rest the horses and share a simple meal. As they were preparing to resume their journey, Ben suddenly tensed, his hand moving to his revolver. "What is it?" Catherine asked, alarmed by his change in demeanor. "Riders," he said tersely, nodding toward a distant ridge. "3 of them watching us." Catherine squinted in the direction he indicated, barely making out the silhouettes against the sky. "Could they be travelers like us?" "Possible," Ben conceded, "but they're keeping their distance, observing, not the behavior of honest folks." He quickly began packing up their small camp. "We need to move. There's a narrow canyon ahead that offers some protection." They set off at a quicker pace, Ben's alertness communicating itself to Catherine. She kept her father's revolver close at hand as they traveled, frequently checking behind them for signs of pursuit. The canyon appeared, as Ben had described, a narrow passage between towering rock formations that offered limited approaches. They had just entered the sheltered area when the sound of hoofbeats echoed behind them. "Get down," Ben commanded, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. Catherine obeyed instantly, crouching low in the wagon seat as Ben took up a defensive position behind a large boulder. The riders approached slowly, clearly aware they were expected. They halted just outside the canyon's entrance. 3 rough-looking men with bandanas pulled over the lower portions of their faces. "That's far enough," Ben called out, his rifle trained on the leader. The lead rider raised his hands in a gesture of peace, though Catherine noted he kept them suspiciously close to his holstered pistol. No need for unfriendliness, friend. Just looking to pass the time with fellow travelers. Pass it somewhere else, Ben replied coldly. We're not looking for company. The man chuckled, the sound sending a chill down Catherine's spine. That's a mighty pretty companion you've got there. Might be worth sharing. Catherine felt bile rise in her throat at the implication. Ben's voice, when he responded, was deadly calm. Last warning. Ride on or I start shooting. A tense silence followed, broken only by the shifting of horses and the whistle of wind through the canyon. Finally, the leader shrugged. Another time, perhaps, he said, his eyes lingering on Catherine before he signaled his companions to withdraw. They watched until the riders disappeared over the ridge, but Ben remained vigilant, his expression grim. They'll be back, he said. And likely with more men. We need to push hard, reach more populated areas before nightfall. They traveled without stopping for the remainder of the day, the wagon jolting over increasingly rough terrain as Ben led them away from established trails. By sunset, they had reached a small settlement consisting of a way station, a rudimentary saloon, and a handful of cabins. Copper Creek, Ben explained as they approached. Not much to look at, but there's safety in numbers. The proprietor of the way station, a widow named Mrs. Thornton, offered Catherine a small room for the night while Ben arranged to sleep in the stables with the horses. After a simple but filling dinner, Catherine found herself sitting with Ben on the way station's narrow porch, watching as stars appeared in the darkening sky. "You think those men followed us?" she asked, unable to shake the memory of the leader's predatory gaze. Ben shook his head. "Doubt they'd try anything here. Too many witnesses." He glanced at her. "But we'll need to be careful until we reach Silver City. Men like that, they don't give up easily." Catherine nodded, drawing her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Thank you for protecting me." "It seems I'm constantly in your debt." "No debt between us," Ben said firmly. "I'd do the same for anyone." "Would you?" Catherine asked, turning to look at him directly. In the fading light, she saw uncertainty cross his features before he looked away. "We should turn in. Early start tomorrow." The abrupt change of subject stung, but Catherine didn't press the issue. As she rose to go inside, Ben spoke again. "Catherine," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "I'd do more for you than for anyone. That's the truth of it." The simple admission hung in the air between them. Catherine's heart quickened, but before she could respond, Ben stood and walked away toward the stables, leaving her with words unspoken on her lips. The next morning brought heavy skies and the threat of snow. They set out at first light, Ben more taciturn than usual as they navigated the increasingly mountainous terrain. Catherine respected his silence, using the time to gather her thoughts about the feelings developing between them. By midday, the first snowflakes began to fall, quickly thickening into a steady shower that reduced visibility and made the trail treacherous. Ben guided them to a sheltered overhang where they could wait out the worst of the weather. "Storm might last through the night," he said as they huddled under the meager protection of the rock formation. "We'll need a proper fire." Together they gathered what dry wood they could find, working quickly before the snow soaked everything. As Catherine helped Ben build the fire, their hands brushed, sending an unexpected jolt through her that had nothing to do with the cold. Ben must have felt it too, for he paused, his eyes meeting hers. For a long moment neither moved, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. It was Catherine who finally broke the spell, pulling her hand away to continue arranging the kindling. "You mentioned we're only a day or so from Silver City now," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Ben nodded, striking a match to light the fire. "Weather permitting." This snow could slow us considerably. As the flames caught and grew, Catherine sat back on her heels, watching the fire dance. What will you do once you've found Cordell? Ben was quiet for a long moment. I used to think I knew, he finally said. Spent 2 years tracking him, imagining the moment I'd face him. He added another piece of wood to the fire. Now I'm not so certain. Because of the law? Catherine asked. Because of you, Ben replied simply. The admission hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Catherine felt her breath catch in her throat. Me. Ben met her gaze, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. Meeting you has changed things, made me question what I'm doing, what I want. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. I've lived with this need for vengeance for so long, I'm not sure who I am without it. Catherine moved closer, her heart pounding. Perhaps it's time to find out. Their eyes held, and Catherine saw the conflict raging within him, the desire for revenge warring with the possibility of something new, something hopeful. Slowly, hesitantly, Ben reached out to brush a snowflake from her cheek, his touch gentle against her skin. I never expected you, he said softly, never expected to feel this way again. Catherine leaned into his touch, her own hand rising to cover his. Neither did I. The moment hung between them, fragile and perfect. Then Ben leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that started tentatively but quickly deepened as Catherine responded. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer as the storm raged outside their shelter. When they finally parted, both breathless, Ben rested his forehead against hers. I don't have much to offer a woman like you, Catherine. My life's been complicated. I'm not asking for promises, she replied, her hands resting against his chest. Just honesty. Ben nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then, honestly, I'm falling in love with you. And it terrifies me more than any gunfight ever has. Catherine smiled, her heart soaring at his words. Honestly, I feel the same way. They spent the night huddled together by the fire, talking as the snow continued to fall outside their shelter. Ben spoke of his childhood in Texas, of his parents' death from fever, and of his close relationship with his brother. Catherine shared her dreams for the school in Silver City, her fears about starting anew, and her gradual acceptance of her parents' passing. As dawn approached and the storm began to abate, they faced the reality of the day ahead and the uncertainties that awaited them in Silver City. Whatever happens with Cordell, Catherine said as they prepared to continue their journey, I want you to know that I believe in your goodness, Ben. I've seen it every day since we met. Ben's expression softened as he helped her into the wagon. You make me want to be worthy of that belief. The trail was difficult after the snowfall, but they made steady progress. By late afternoon, they had descended into a broader valley, and Ben pointed to smoke rising in the distance. Silver City, he said. We'll be there before sunset. As they approached the outskirts of the town, Catherine felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. Their journey together was ending, but what would follow remained uncertain. Silver City appeared larger than she had imagined, a sprawling collection of buildings dominated by mining operations, with wagons and riders moving along muddy streets. Ben guided them toward the center of town, his posture tense as his eyes scanned their surroundings. Catherine knew he was looking for signs of William Cordell, the man he had tracked for so long. They stopped outside a modest building with Silver City Hotel painted across its facade. Ben helped Catherine down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. The school board president, Mr. Hollister, has arranged accommodations for me, Catherine said, reluctant to part from Ben. Will you? Where will you stay? There's a boarding house on the edge of town where I've stayed before, Ben replied. I'll get settled, then start making inquiries about Cordell. Catherine nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. When will I see you again? Ben touched her cheek gently. Soon, I promise. He glanced around the busy street. "But for now, let's get you safely inside." Mr. Hollister proved to be a portly, enthusiastic man with a genuine passion for education. He welcomed Catherine warmly, expressing relief at her safe arrival despite the delay caused by weather. "We've prepared quarters for you above the schoolhouse," he explained as they walked through town. "Nothing fancy, but comfortable enough. The children are eager to meet their new teacher, all 27 of them." Catherine listened politely, asking appropriate questions about the curriculum and school supplies, but her thoughts kept returning to Ben. When they reached the small schoolhouse at the end of the main street, she was pleased to discover that her accommodations, though simple, were indeed comfortable. A single room with a bed, desk, bookshelf, and small stove for heating. "Classes begin on Monday," Mr. Hollister informed her. "That gives you 3 days to settle in and prepare." After he departed, Catherine stood at her window, looking out at the town that would be her new home. Silver City was a far cry from her quiet Missouri hometown, louder, more chaotic, with a rough energy that both excited and intimidated her. And somewhere within its bustling streets, Ben was hunting the man who had killed his brother. The next morning, Catherine busied herself with organizing the schoolroom, taking inventory of books and supplies while trying to ignore the constant worry about Ben's whereabouts. When a knock came at the schoolhouse door shortly after midday, her heart leaped with hope. It wasn't Ben, but a young woman about her own age with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Miss Miller, I'm Emily Wilson, the pastor's wife. I thought you might appreciate some company and perhaps a tour of our little town." Catherine accepted gratefully, glad for the distraction. As they walked, Emily pointed out the various establishments: the general store, the assayer's office, the church where her husband preached, and the 3 saloons that served the miners and cowboys. "It's not as rough as it appears," Emily assured her, noting Catherine's expression as they passed the noisiest of the saloons. "There's a good community here, families trying to build something lasting." "Have you lived here long?" Catherine inquired. "Almost 2 years," Emily replied. "We came when the silver boom was just beginning. My husband felt called to minister to the miners and their families." She smiled. "I assist with teaching the youngest children on occasion, so we'll be working together." As they continued their tour, Catherine gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. "Mrs. Wilson, have you ever heard of a man named William Cordell?" Emily's steps faltered. "Cordell? Yes, unfortunately. He's developed quite a reputation around these parts." Her voice lowered. "He and his men control much of the trade in stolen silver, among other criminal activities." "Why do you ask?" Catherine hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal about Ben's mission. "I heard the name during my journey. There was talk of his presence in Silver City." Emily nodded gravely. "He arrived about a month ago. Sheriff Blackburn has been keeping an eye on him, but without proof of wrongdoing, there's little he can do." She touched Catherine's arm. "Best to stay clear of such men, Miss Miller. They bring nothing but trouble." The warning only increased Catherine's concern for Ben. If Cordell was as dangerous as Emily suggested, confronting him could prove fatal. That evening, as Catherine prepared for bed in her new quarters, a soft tap at her door startled her. She approached cautiously, her hand near the revolver she kept on her bedside table. "Who is it?" she called. "It's me," Ben's voice replied, low and urgent. Catherine quickly unlocked the door, relief flooding through her at the sight of him standing in the dim hallway. She pulled him inside, closing the door behind him. "I've been worried sick," she said, taking in his tired appearance. "Have you found him?" Ben nodded grimly. "He's here, staying at the Golden Nugget Saloon, has 5 men with him, all armed." He sank into the room's single chair, removing his hat. I watched them most of the day. Cordell's expecting someone a buyer for stolen silver from what I overheard. Catherine poured a cup of water from the pitcher on her washstand, offering it to Ben. Have you spoken to the sheriff? Briefly, Ben replied after taking a drink. Sheriff Blackburn knows Cordell's reputation but claims his hands are tied without evidence. His expression darkened. I got the distinct impression he's being paid to look the other way. Catherine sat on the edge of her bed, facing him. What will you do? Ben ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she now recognized as a sign of his inner conflict. I don't know. Part of me wants to confront him, finish what I came for. He looked up, meeting her gaze. But then I think of you, of what might come after, and I'm not sure anymore. Catherine moved to kneel before him, taking his hands in hers. Ben, I understand your need for justice. Your brother deserves that, but please don't throw away your future, our future, for vengeance. The words hung between them, the first acknowledgement of a possible shared path forward. Ben's expression softened as he reached out to touch her face. Our future, he repeated softly. I like the sound of that. Before Catherine could respond, a commotion erupted outside, shouting, followed by the sound of breaking glass and then a gunshot. Ben was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. Trouble at the saloon, he said, reaching for his hat. Stay here, lock the door behind me. Ben, please, Catherine began, fear gripping her heart. He turned back to her, his expression determined but gentle. I'll be careful, I promise. He drew her into a quick, fierce embrace before slipping out the door. Catherine stood frozen for a moment, torn between obeying his instruction to remain safely inside and her fear for his safety. Finally, she grabbed her shawl and her revolver, following after him into the night. The main street was in chaos. A crowd had gathered outside the Golden Nugget saloon, where raised voices and the crash of furniture indicated a serious altercation inside. Catherine pushed her way through the onlookers, ignoring the surprised looks her presence garnered. Inside, the scene was one of destruction. Tables overturned, broken glass scattered across the floor, and in the center of it all, two groups of men faced off against each other, weapons drawn. Catherine spotted Ben immediately, standing slightly apart from both groups, his stance tense and vigilant. Across from him, a tall man with a silver-streaked beard and cold eyes could only be William Cordell. Walker, Cordell drawled, recognition dawning in his eyes. James Walker's little brother, I wondered if you'd ever catch up to me. Ben's hand hovered near his holstered revolver. It's over, Cordell. I'm taking you in alive or dead, your choice. Cordell laughed, the sound devoid of humor. You and what army, boy? In case you haven't noticed, you're outnumbered. Not exactly, came a new voice as Sheriff Blackburn stepped through the saloon doors, accompanied by several deputies. Seems Mr. Walker here brought some interesting evidence to my attention earlier today. Documents connecting you to that stage robbery last month, among other things. Cordell's expression hardened as he glanced between Ben and the sheriff. Blackburn, we had an arrangement. Had is the operative word, the sheriff replied coolly. I may bend the law occasionally, Cordell, but I draw the line at the murder of federal marshals. Catherine watched the exchange with growing tension, her heart in her throat as Cordell's men shifted their positions, clearly preparing for violence. She moved closer to the bar, trying to remain unnoticed while keeping Ben in sight. Last chance, Cordell, Ben said, his voice steady. Surrender now. For a moment it seemed Cordell might comply, then his hand moved lightning fast toward his gun. Ben was faster, drawing and firing in one fluid motion. Cordell staggered backward, a look of surprise crossing his face as he clutched his shoulder. Chaos erupted as Cordell's men opened fire. Ben dove for cover behind an overturned table as bullets splintered the wood around him. The sheriff and his deputies returned fire, the small saloon becoming a deafening cacophony of gunshots and shouting. Catherine crouched behind the bar, terrified but determined to help if she could. When she saw one of Cordell's men moving to flank Ben's position, she didn't hesitate. Raising her father's revolver, she fired a warning shot that sent the man scrambling for better cover. Ben's head whipped around at the sound, his eyes widening when he spotted her. "Catherine, get down!" A bullet struck the bar inches from her head, sending splinters flying. Catherine ducked lower, her heart pounding as the gunfight continued around her. Gradually, the shooting subsided as Cordell's men, realizing they were outmatched, began to surrender. Cordell himself lay wounded but alive, his gun kicked away by one of the deputies. As the sheriff's men secured the prisoners, Ben rushed to Catherine's side, his face pale with concern. "Are you hurt? What were you thinking coming in here?" "I couldn't stay away, not knowing you might," Catherine broke off, unable to complete the thought. "Are you injured?" Ben shook his head, helping her to her feet. "I'm fine, but you could have been killed." "As could you," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "It seems we're both stubborn when it comes to protecting those we care about." Something in Ben's expression shifted, a softening that made Catherine's heart skip. Before he could respond, however, Sheriff Blackburn approached. "That was some shooting, Miss Miller," he commented, eyeing her with newfound respect. "Though I can't say I approve of civilians involving themselves in law enforcement matters." "My apologies, Sheriff," Catherine replied, though her tone suggested she wasn't particularly sorry. "I saw someone I care about in danger and acted accordingly." The sheriff's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Well, no harm done. In fact, you may have saved Walker's life with that warning shot." He turned to Ben. "Cordell will stand trial for your brother's murder along with his other crimes. You've done good work bringing this evidence to light, Walker." Ben nodded, though his attention remained on Catherine. "What about his men? They'll face justice too," Blackburn assured him. "Now I suggest you get Miss Miller home safely. This is hardly a place for a schoolteacher." As they stepped outside, the night air cool against their flushed faces, Ben kept his arm around Catherine's waist. The street had filled with curious onlookers, and whispers followed them as they made their way back toward the schoolhouse. "My reputation in town is likely ruined before I've even taught my first lesson," Catherine observed with a wry smile. Ben shook his head. "I doubt it. If anything, you've established yourself as someone not to be trifled with. That carries weight out here." When they reached her door, Ben hesitated. "I should go. There will be statements to give, paperwork to complete." Catherine caught his hand before he could turn away. "Will you come back afterward?" The question held more meaning than the simple words suggested, and Ben seemed to understand. His blue eyes searched hers, finding the answer to an unspoken question. "Yes," he said softly. "If you want me to." Catherine nodded, unable to voice the depth of her feelings. Ben leaned forward, kissing her with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the violence they had just witnessed. When they parted, he pressed his forehead to hers for a moment before reluctantly stepping away. "I'll return as soon as I can," he promised, then disappeared into the night. True to his word, Ben returned several hours later, his face weary but his eyes lighter than Catherine had ever seen them. As they sat before the small fire in her stove, he told her of Cordell's confession, extracted as the outlaw's wounds were being treated. "He admitted to everything," Ben said, wonder in his voice. "The ambush, James's murder, all of it. There's no doubt he'll hang." Catherine took his hand. "Does it bring you peace?" Ben was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Not peace exactly, but closure, like a door closing on a dark room, allowing light into others." He squeezed her hand. I've lived with this anger for so long, I'm not sure who I am without it. You're the man who saved me from wolves, Catherine said softly. Who protected me on the journey here, who treats children with kindness and fights for justice rather than mere revenge. That's who you are, Ben Walker. Ben's eyes held hers, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. And what happens now? You have your teaching position, your new life here. Yes, Catherine acknowledged. And what of you? With Cordell captured, what keeps you in Silver City? Ben raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her palm. Only the most important reason of all. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Catherine began her teaching duties, quickly winning the respect of her students and the approval of the school board. Ben, recognized for his role in capturing Cordell, was offered a position as deputy sheriff, a role he accepted after considerable thought. They proceeded cautiously with their relationship, mindful of Catherine's position in the community. Their evenings were spent in conversation, learning each other's histories, dreams, and fears. Ben spoke of his years tracking Cordell, of the emptiness that had driven him, and of his growing desire for a different kind of life. Catherine shared her initial trepidations about coming west, her grief for her parents, and her hope of creating something meaningful in her new home. Together, they began to envision a shared future tentatively at first, then with increasing certainty. On a crisp Sunday afternoon, a month after their arrival in Silver City, Ben took Catherine riding in the hills overlooking the town. They stopped at a small clearing where wildflowers had begun to emerge from beneath the melting snow. "I've been thinking," Ben said as they stood together, watching the sun set over the distant mountains, "about building a home." Catherine glanced at him, her heart quickening. "Here in Silver City," Ben nodded, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous. "There's land available on the northern edge of town. Good soil, access to water, close enough for your teaching duties but with room to breathe." He took a deep breath. "Room for a family someday, if that's something you might want." Catherine turned to face him fully, hope rising in her chest. "Ben Walker, are you asking me to marry you?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I'm doing a poor job of it, aren't I?" He took her hands in his. "Catherine Miller, I've loved you since the moment you stood your ground against those wolves, revolver in hand and determination in your eyes. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Tears of joy welled in Catherine's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Oh, yes." Ben gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet as he kissed her, both of them laughing and crying at once. When he finally set her down, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple silver ring. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "The only thing of hers I kept all these years." Catherine admired the ring, perfect in its simplicity. "It's beautiful, Ben. I'll treasure it always." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church on Silver City's Main Street, with Emily Wilson and Sheriff Blackburn standing as witnesses. The entire town turned out for the celebration that followed, the community embracing their new teacher and deputy with genuine warmth. Their home took shape gradually over the following months, a sturdy cabin built with Ben's own hands, with Catherine's careful planning evident in every detail. By the time winter returned to Silver City, they had created a warm haven against the cold. Catherine continued teaching, her classroom growing as more families settled in the area. Ben thrived in his role as deputy, his understanding of the frontier and its people making him particularly effective at maintaining peace in the growing town. On their first anniversary, as they sat before the fire in their home, Ben presented Catherine with a gift, a finely crafted rocking chair. "For the baby," he explained, his eyes twinkling with joy. Catherine gasped, her hand flying to her still flat stomach. "How did you know?" I was planning to tell you tonight. Ben laughed, drawing her onto his lap in the new chair. You've been radiant these past weeks and queasy in the mornings. I may be just a deputy, but I can piece together clues. As they rocked gently, discussing names and dreams for their child, Catherine reflected on the strange path that had led her to this moment. A broken wagon wheel, a wolf attack, a chance meeting with a man seeking vengeance who found love instead. "What are you thinking about?" Ben asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Catherine smiled, nestling closer in his arms. "About how sometimes the most difficult journeys lead us exactly where we need to be." Ben pressed a kiss to her temple. "And how sometimes, when we're at our most vulnerable and alone, the right person comes along to remind us that we never truly have to face the wilderness by ourselves." "You're not alone out here," Catherine quoted softly, remembering his words from that first night. Ben's arms tightened around her. "Neither of us are, not anymore." 7 months later, as spring blossomed across the territory, their son James Benjamin Walker was born, named for the uncle he would never meet, but whose memory would be preserved in stories of courage and honor. As the years passed, Silver City continued to grow, transforming from a rough mining town into a proper settlement. The Walker family grew as well, with the addition of a daughter, Elizabeth Rose, 2 years after James's birth. Ben eventually became sheriff when Blackburn retired, bringing his unique blend of frontier justice and compassion to the role. Catherine expanded her teaching to include adult education for miners and ranch hands eager to improve their literacy. Together, they built a life richer than either had imagined possible when they first met on that snowy trail. Their home became a gathering place for friends and neighbors, a sanctuary for travelers, and a testament to the love that had blossomed in the most unexpected of circumstances. On warm summer evenings, they would often sit on their porch, watching their children play as the sunset painted the mountains gold. During one such moment, as their 10th anniversary approached, Catherine looked at Ben and saw in his weathered face the same man who had fought off wolves to protect a stranger, still strong, still kind, still the center of her world. "Any regrets?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Ben smiled, taking her hand in his as they had done countless times before. "Not a single one. Every trail led me to you, Catherine. Every step was worth it." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land they had come to call home, they knew with absolute certainty that some journeys, no matter how fraught with danger, lead precisely where the heart is meant to be.